So my friends, here we have it. Wow. NBA Jam, you know. The original NBA Jam for the Game Boy and the NBA Jam TE, the Tournament Edition. Two of the most legendary games out there. And I can tell you, watch now. These were the original Game Boy versions, 1994, 1995. Two games, and they were developed for arcade. You know, the first game out there from the NBA Jam was for arcade. That was 1993, and then 94 and 95 for the consoles, SNES, Mega Drive, Game Boy. Those games came out. You know, they were after the arcade game, and the arcade game is a top 10 of the most selling things ever in the arcade game. You know, a top 10 game NBA Jam. That was an absolute sensation, and I was there at that time. You know, I can remember when that came out, what influence that had, and also NBA Jam on the Mega Drive. I don't know if it's the Jam or the TE version, but a top 10 of the most selling Mega Drive games of all time. You know, then you see the impact, and that was unbelievable. NBA Jam as an arcade game, and for the young ones, the arcade were machines. You know, these were those big computers where you could enter in and play there with joysticks and buttons. You know, that was like the old television where you could enter in. There were extra buildings, halls. You entered in, you had to pay money, and then you could play the game until you lost, and then you had to pay in another coin. And that was arcade game, and there were, you know, there was no internet, no online and those things, you know. And so we went in those things, but here by us we had not one holidays. We were always on holiday. So I had seen it in Spain, you know, at Mallorca, at Ibiza, and in Italy especially. And that was fantastic. And then, you know, a year later, in 1994, the NBA Jam for the consoles came out, you know. And the NBA Jam Tournament Edition was then 1995 for the consoles. And the first one, 2 versus 2, you know, I can show you that. That's absolutely legendary. And the Game Boy was this tool which was not in color, you know. Here you see, that was the pictures. There was no color, you see. But the gameplay was absolutely fantastic. 2 versus 2. You had a lot of NBA players. You see, Patrick Ewing was in, Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler. Or was Drexler in the first in? I think in the second one. But you see, Sean Kemp, Detlef Schrempf, you know, Germany. And that was fantastic, you know. And this sentence, Boom Shakalaka, went legendary, you know. One of the most legendary sentences in games. And the impact as a basketball player, I tell you, that is still the reason why I like 2 versus 2 and I don't like 3 versus 3. Because of NBA Jam, I tell you that. That is the reason why I like 2 versus 2, still one court against the other, and not to play only one ring. You know, the whole field like it was in the game. And that was the big influence. But this game, NBA Jam TE, the Tournament Edition, boy, that was then the absolute fantastic thing. The gameplay was almost the same, but there was a difference. You had a lot more players to play, because in the first version you had not all the players. And you see here is the same, not in color, almost the same. The dunks, I think, were a bit different, but you had, I think here you had 54 players, or 54 NBA players. Here you see it, and here you had over 100, I think. But but you see, where do we have it? Here was Clyde Drexler. You see it from the Houston Rockets, and a lot of players. But Michael Jordan was not in the game, not in the first one, not in the second one. Because of the license, he had his own rights, but they made an extra tool out there for him private. So he had a machine, an arcade machine with him in there. And also Gary Payton, he was in the second game, but I don't know in the first game. I don't think in the first you had 2 players, and in in the tournament edition you had 3 players, what I remember. And Shaq was also, yeah, it was so, Shaq was in the arcade game, in the big arcade machine, but not in those 2 games, you know. And when I think back, I can tell you, I was there in Italy, and the arcade game, that was mind-blowing. The graphic of this tool as a kid, when you have seen this, that was really, that has to be 1993 or 4, when I was somewhere in, I don't know, it was in Pesaro, Rimini, I think it was Rimini, in Italy, on the beach. And there they had the street with all the shops, and there was this arcade machine, NBA Jam. And when I have seen that, I can remember that exactly now, as a little boy, and there were big people, maybe they were teenagers, 19, 20 years, 18 years, 22, I don't know. For me, they were grown up, and they played there, and I watched the first time this. I thought, wow, the game looks like we are in 2000 something, 10 years ahead. The colors, the graphic, the gameplay. And I think there was Shaq in, but I cannot guarantee you it. Because Shaq, and Penny Hardaway were my favorite team, the Orlando Magic with the Charlotte Hornets. But this was fantastic, I swear you. And so, then I got the NBA Jam 1994 as a Game Boy version. I also had the Mega Drive at home, but I had not the game, I had it there, and when you had one game you don't need it for other console, the same game, even if it was in color. But, and I tell you, when you had this game, you didn't play this anymore, because there was everything better and more people to play, And then I played that so long, so often, that was so cool with all those magical dunks, And that is still what I do nowadays, with those tricks. That was not the End One thing, End One came so much later. That was the end of the 90s, early 2000s. But this was the thing what we wanted to make. That came all from NBA Jam to us, or to me. But that was absolutely great. And I played this before I went to school, for example, at the morning table to eat the breakfast, with milk and the Kellogg's, And then I played on the Game Boy. And my grandmother always told me, no, you have to go to school now. You have to go, you come too late. No, 1 minute. I'm so far, I have to make the point, I win the game. That was the tournament edition, And that was absolutely outstanding. And I can tell you a beside story. The founder of this game, the founder who developed this game, who was one of the main developers or founder, he was a Detroit Pistons fan. And when you played, for example, the Chicago Bulls, the story, Chicago with Jordan and the bad Detroit Pistons, I was also a Pistons fan. And he was a Pistons fan because he came from that area, I think. And so he developed in the game, when you played the Bulls and you made the last shot before the clock ended, the shot never got in, When you played against the Detroit Pistons, I think, or in general, But with the Chicago, when you made the last shot, it never went in because he didn't like the Chicago Bulls, because of a Pistons fan. A beside story, And so those games made a complete impact to all basketball games what came out later on, and that influenced so many people because that was fantastic. The other had it on SNES, the other one on the Mega Drive, I had it on Game Boy. That was fantastic. But first was the arcade game in 1993, and then that was so cool time, The arcade halls, nowadays people cannot imagine that. That was the thing, when you have seen that was the dream, To go in, so many games. There was also Street Fighter. Street Fighter I've also seen, that was the other arcade hall. There they didn't have NBA Jam, but that was that was also in Mallorca, Mallorca. There was Street Fighter, that was also legendary. But this, absolutely outstanding. These are the originals. These are mine. which I had, and back then you always watched behind when was it made. There you see 1993 and then 1994, you see? There you always watched, and this was 94, but the arcade I told you, 93, 94 NBA Jam for Game Boy, here you see it, and this was 95, and we had it always later on, you know, always after the US. Most of the time we had to wait and wait in Europe, but that was mind blowing, you know. Two of the legendary games, that was really fantastic. Yeah, in that sense, from those legendary games, we will see us again from the biggest, you know. Now we will have a little bit of blurry background, you know, with the smartphone. And that it is. So we see us again. Until then, bye and ciao.
And I always do it big because I can.